Who knew I would make it this far? They hated, they never believed me. Yeah, I would never drop the ball. I know I make it look easy. Yeah, Mayweather with the defense. I don't care what a critic got to say. I got them picking up the pieces. That mean you really playing with your life. I'm about to come and run it all back.
What's up, guys? David DeSalle here, your host of the Business with the Boyz podcast, and I'm joined today with my co-host, as always, Landon Troyer, and we're going to be doing something a little different today. So as we've been chatting with you all offline, getting some emails from folks, collaborating on social media, interacting on social media, a common sort of underlying theme that we've heard outside of the encouragement and connecting us with other folks is, hey, you guys leave some crumbs about who you are and your backgrounds and the things that you've gone through as you're chatting with your guests. But we'd love to hear more about you guys. When are you going to do an episode on you? And to be honest, when Landon and I set out to do this, we wanted to help facilitate conversations with great people who happen to run businesses in an effort to get their story out there, their message out there, all in an effort to help all of you. And this was not ever meant to be, nor will it be, the David and Landon show. We are simply helping piece together the puzzle for all of you and the guests that we bring on. But with that being said, we have been asked time and time again, hey, can you tell us about yourselves? So today we are going to unpack Landon, see how deep we can dig, learn about your background and the things that you're doing now. So I'm excited to unpack this. I feel like I know a lot about you, but I'm hoping that I get to learn something new today.
Strap in, buckle up, let's go.
All right. So I guess going all the way back, you've mentioned before, I remember, you shared a story. You were like, yeah, I used to ride my dirt bike through the fields over to school as a kid. And I'm like, wow, that is way different than my childhood. You've alluded to, I think, your dad having a welding company. I guess just kind of bring us back to the beginning. What was life like when you were just a little shit and not a big shit?
Yeah. So, I guess to hit the rewind button 30 plus years ago, grew up in small town America out in western Nebraska, a little town called Hershey, Nebraska. And life was simple. In all honesty, it was a great way to grow up. Grew up on a family homestead that, I think went back to what would have been my great grandfather. I was fortunate to know both my great grandfather and my great grandmother, and my great grandfather farmed, the farm operation. And then after that, it kind of got to a point where they were cash renting the farm ground, but we still had kind of our old homestead out there. So it was myself and our family, mom and dad, my younger sister. It was my uncle Kyle and his family. It was my grandma Tinny and grandpa Dan, and then some aunts and uncles and some cousins, all within a mile of each other. Right. So, like I said, it was a good way to grow up. It was peaceful. We went to a one-room schoolhouse through 8th grade until high school. That there was 16 kids, kindergarten through 8th grade, most of which were my cousins. And yes, I did ride my motorcycle to school, which was right across the pasture, and life was good.
That's so different than my
different than
upbringing.
Massachusetts.
Yeah, it's not like, better or worse, or it's just different. I mean, I thought my school was small. We probably had 40 something kids in our class through grade school. Then high school was like 300 something kids, but like the public high school was more like 2,000 kids, so it felt small. I can't imagine. I mean, hopefully you guys like each other, because there's only 16 of you guys.
Yep. And I couldn't imagine, the other way. Right. So that's what I knew. And I loved it. I don't know that I could necessarily live there now and have a wonderful, great lifestyle compared to what I'm used to. But, as you know, I did choose to move my family to a rather small community and on this end of the state, in a little town called Ashland, Nebraska, because I appreciate the peace and quiet and solidarity, and I don't mind growing up in the middle of cornfields for sure.
I know you, and I might struggle, just for everyone listening, like asking questions on behalf of all of you, in which I already happen to know, some of the answers to. So forgive me in advance, but I want to try to come in with a clean slate and not skip over anything just because I happen to know. But what are some of the lessons that you've learned, or some of the experience that you've had, particularly with your mom and dad growing up? I know that there's been some great aspects. There's been some speed bumps. Maybe just kind of unpack some of that stuff.
Yeah. So, I'm not going to say that I had a brutal childhood or anything like that. That's absolutely not the case. I have amazing mom and dad. Unfortunately lost my father. But my dad in all aspects, for the most part, I would say, one, he was my best friend. Two, he was just an absolute badass, to be honest with you. Was a business owner, the typical entrepreneur. When I was born in North Carolina. My sister was born 3 years later in Montana. And reason for that was my dad was a welder and was chasing jobs all around the country. And so he and my mom moved around like crazy. And then again, after they had my sister and their second child, they decided it was time to come back to the good life here in Nebraska. And seeing welding is what my dad knew, he opened up a welding and machine shop with his younger brother, Kyle. And that's all they ever did from that point on, right? Was just bust their ass. Did a lot of work for anybody and everybody, right? I mean, when you're a small welding shop in North Platte, Nebraska, you're working with farmers, you're working with Union Pacific Railroad, with anybody, so very well multifaceted individuals, right? They got to run the business, they got to have the technical skills, they got to hire. But the one thing my dad always said was, "You'll never run this business, you'll never own this business," because, and while, I know he said that with the best of intentions, he knew it wasn't an easy way to make a living, and it's not, right? He busted his ass every day. My uncle, same thing, is still doing it. My cousin's in the business. I kind of wish I had more of that skill set. But as you know, my roots are still there because I like doing a lot of my own projects and building. Hence why when you have a house question, I think I'm maybe on the short list of calls you make, because I do. I love getting my hands dirty. I love building things, seeing projects from start to finish. So that's kind of the lens and scope of which I grew up. And it was a work your butt off family. And I appreciate that very much. I didn't at the time maybe, but I very much do now. And unfortunately, when I was 5 years old, my sister was 2, would have put my dad at age 27. He was at the welding shop. He'd been having some headaches, couldn't figure out why. Well, one day he blacks out, boom, hits the pavement, goes into a seizure, and consequently is taken to the hospital, where they say, "Oh, this thing is above our pay grade here in North Platte, Nebraska. You need to get to Denver." They get him to Denver, and he's diagnosed with a glioblastoma brain tumor. And they basically said, "You got 3 to 6 months to live. Get your shit in order and go spend some time with your family." So that obviously hits like a bomb in our household. Again, my dad, being the individual that he is, didn't think that was an acceptable answer. And so they started looking for other options. And so they ended up at Mayo Clinic. And I can't give enough credit to Mayo Clinic. They said, they're probably right. You probably don't have much. I mean, nobody's beaten the system on a glioblastoma brain tumor, right? So, but they also didn't think that he should give up. So he ultimately ended up going through chemo, radiation, and a surgery in which they removed roughly a fist size of his brain, which was pretty much the max that they could without leaving him a vegetable. And so obviously rehab was pretty tough from there on, learning to do all your basic motor functions and all that again. But, to his credit, he, again, being a badass dude, just kind of took it on the chin and said, "I'm not going to let this thing kill me." And he did. I mean, he was, again, I was 5, so I can't say that I knew him pre-diagnosis. But from what my mother and others have told me, he was always kind of very similar to what many would say I probably am now. He was kind of a go-getter. He was definitely a people person. He loved his people. His friends were like family. And so I think, I've got a lot of what's instilled in me is from my dad, for sure.
I didn't realize that because I know this story, I guess, to a degree, but I didn't realize that he was 27 when this happened.
Yeah.
And then how old was he when he passed? How old were you?
43. I was 21.
So so one place gave him 3 to 6 months. And
yeah.
And he
16 years.
Wow. I mean,
yeah.
Talk about
it's pretty hard-headed. You call it that. Some say it was completely hard-headed. Just refused to take that as an answer.
And what was
he was honestly though he was a bit of a medical marvel. Like not many people globally have ever made 10 years of the glioblastoma brain tumor. And so yeah.
And I would imagine it wasn't like a smooth road over those 16 years. There were probably some speed bumps along the way, health wise. Yeah. And you sort of, I'd imagine the older you got, the more you're able to remember compared to when you were 5. What were some of the things that happened I remember over that time period?
So, I mean, on occasion, he was on Dilantin and all these medications for monitoring and trying to keep his seizures in check. But I can remember I was in 8th grade, and I'll never forget, that time, I don't know why I was sleeping on the couch out at our house in town when I was growing up. And he must have been up late getting something to eat out of the fridge or something. Right. But I remember just vividly waking up to a smash on the ground. Right. And I looked down and it was my dad. Right. He had fallen from standing up position, obviously, into a seizure. So no arms or anything, just bam, just bashes his face on the ground and he's having a seizure. Mom wakes up. I'm freaked out, she calls the ambulance, and then he freaks out when they get there because he doesn't know what's going on. He's in nothing but his chonies, his Hanes, right? And he is bolting out the front door, like gone. And my dad was a scrapper, and he would maybe say, He'd probably tell you, yeah, he liked to fight. So he'd go, right. So he is just like freaked out. And then, they've got all these cops chasing him, and he's hard to grab because he's literally in just his underwear.
Wait, he's just running away. He's you're not taking me?
Yeah, dude. Like he was just shaking guys off, like throwing dudes. Yeah. So it took 6, 7 guys to get him onto a stretcher, get him loaded in the ambulance. It was nuts, right? But there was shit like that occasionally, the chaos happened. But he was dad as far as I knew dad, right? And we had a unique relationship. I'll never forget it. One day I was back my freshman year of college. It was the summer before I left for college. I had bought a brand new Kawasaki Ninja 636. Why wouldn't you? Because I grew up on a motorcycle. Got my first motorcycle at 5 from Santa. Wrecked it Christmas morning. Dude.
Santa, my dude.
Yeah. My Santa was a badass dude, right? I grew up on a Pee Wee 80 and graduated to had YZ 125, rode with my pops all the time, and then got my street bike, which was a Kawasaki Ninja ZX6R. And my mom was driving home, and we lived out in the country, like I said. So my dad and I are on this bike, and are very similar. We like fast money, fast cars, fast whatever, right? And he and I are cruising. I mean, I know we were doing 120 plus and hauling ass, and he's on the back, right? And we're just no helmets on.
How old are you?
18, 19, whatever. And we meet my mom's car on the road, and we were like, shit. And he's like, you better turn around. She's going to be pissed. We get home. By the time we get turned around, she's bawling, right? I'm like, sorry. She's like, my mom is a saint. Doesn't swear.
I thought you were going to say sailor.
No. She is the opposite. She is a saint, and she is pissed at us. And she is like actually cussing, and that's a big deal. And you idiots, you've already got to, I don't need to lose both of you. And I felt terrible, but that's just the way it was. Like my dad was like literally one of my best friends. I had my first drink at like 15 on the porch with my old man. Like, again, mom comes home pissed. What are you doing? You can't be drinking with, he just wanted to have, no, tomorrow was never guaranteed for him. So I think, so he was just like, you know what, I want to do these first with my son. And we did it. Right, wrong, good, bad, or indifferent. That's the way it went.
That's wild. What was, I remember I went on I had a motorcycle. I had a Honda CBR 600, and me and a group of guys after college, we like trailered our bikes down to Florida. We went to Port St. Lucie, where one of their aunts lived, to like post up there. And then we drove over the west coast of Florida, down the west coast to the Keys, back up the east coast, like over like all in all, it was like a 10-day trip from, home back home. And we had GoPro footage and just like pissing on I remember having the thought of like, I can't believe these things are legal. Like they're rocket ships on wheels. And I looked at the GoPro footage, and I think within a month I sold my bike. I was like, I'm lucky to be alive. I'm getting rid of this thing.
Actually, after my dad passed away, my mom asked me to sell mine because she's like, I don't need to lose you both. And that's where you're going if you keep this thing. I mean, I did north of 160 on my bike one time, and it was insane.
Yeah, I did that in Florida, and it was like the dotted lines become solid lines.
Yep.
And then you
head feels like it's going to blow off in that big ass helmet.
Yeah. And, you usually fill up every, 140 miles, but you have to fill up every 60 miles when you drive like that.
Yep.
Just pissing through gas. So you were 21 when your dad passed.
Yep. My sister was still in high school back home. So I was in Lincoln at the university. My mom and dad were, no, actually Lacey had just graduated. She was a freshman at the university as well. Because we got the call after his tumor came back. Basically there was a bunch of new growth, and he was sitting at the kitchen table one night with my mom. And he couldn't move. It was either his right or his left side of his body, and just kind of looked at my mom like, and so they went in, and then it was within a couple months after that. And my mom called us one day, I'll never forget. She said, you guys need to get here, and you need to get here fast. Like to the point where like state patrol escort on the interstate when we got halfway back to home, and we're hauling ass to get back. And we got back in time to say goodbye. And within 10, 15 minutes, he took his last breath, and we told him it was all right to walk out and go be with the Lord. And he literally waited for us to get there, and then he peaced out 10 minutes later.
I was just
typical dad fashion.
He was probably hanging on for that last moment. What was that like? Like that next moment, the next day? I mean, you were in college or just
I was in college. I mean, it was tough, right? Like I didn't want to admit it at the time, but I handled it completely the wrong way. I mean, I had a bunch of fraternity brothers come back for the funeral. And I was out. I was rocked the morning of my dad's funeral, which is very unfortunate just because I was still out the night before. I mean, I handled it completely the wrong way, but I didn't know how else to handle it, right? If I was out with friends and having a good time, I didn't have to think about it. And that's how I kind of numbed things. And so that was unfortunately kind of the start of a vicious circle there. I mean, I had fun in college, but that escalated things to another level. And, it took me a while, a few years to figure out that was not a good path for sure. And at the end of the day, like I said, my dad was my best friend. So when I got sober, it basically was been out partying, making stupid decisions all night. Woke up one day, like 7, 8 o'clock at night, and went down to the bar to start partying again. Ordered a water, and I never drank again. It was literally just like the good Lord was like, "You're done." I was ashamed of the individual and the man that I become. I knew my dad wouldn't have been proud of where I was at and the decisions I was making. And so I just made the decision then. It was done. All the partying was done. And I wanted to actually do right by him and his name. And so we went to work at that point. And, fortunate for me, I found my career and typical addict personality. Everything I do is to excess. I'm a perfectionist, and so I poured my passion and all my energy into a new career and getting done with school. And that's what I did. And then I fell in love with helping people. I fell in love with the advising side of things. I fell in love with the business owner side of things. And that became my new itch that I had to scratch. So everything revolved around that.
Before we get into the professional side of your life, I want to go back to, so I feel like whether someone would consider it like a problem with, drinking or any other sort of substances that are not good to abuse. So whether they consider it a problem or they're just thinking about, hey, maybe drinking isn't healthy for me, right? Even if it's just casual drinking. I feel like oftentimes folks will not take that step to cut something out of their life that they know is holding them back because of the social stigma and like, well, what if I'm not having fun? What if I'm not going out? And I know there's a side of you that you've shared where it's like, listen, I'm me, take it or leave it. I don't give a fuck if you like me or not. I'm going to do me. And if we're friends, I'm going to go to hell and high water, go through hell and high water for you. But I'd imagine, and maybe I'm wrong, that like, it was still difficult at the beginning to, kind of stay social with folks and not participate in the things that they were participating in. And even too, you share with me today that like, oh yeah, I went out, grabbed a drink with so-and-so, went out and, did happy hour with so-and-so. And I know that means like you literally grabbed a Coke and not
water, an actual, water these days.
Yeah. Water.
75 hard right now.
75 hard. But like, I know what that means, but it's not like you're secluding yourself from socializing. What was, before it became a non-issue, what was it like at the beginning to go and hang out socially, but not drink like you were used to?
Yeah. So, I mean, you're right. Unfortunately, when you're partying at the level that I was at that time, you figure out real quick that you had friends that were just with you for your social standing or what you were doing, right? They just were your party buddies. And so there are people that you just ultimately end up cutting out of your life. And that's okay, because those individuals that's not true give and take relationship, right? But for the most part, I think this probably from meeting a number of my friends here. My friends are like family, right? I always say friends are the family you get to choose. And I mean that, right? Like I'll do anything for if my friends, right? And I'm fortunate and very blessed to have a boatload of friends. And I love them all like brothers, sisters, and family. And so I was kind of honestly surprised at how many of them were like, yo, this is good. You actually needed this. And I was like, well, what the hell did you say anything before?
Thanks for telling me.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean,
well, you can be rather hard headed. So they were probably scared to say anything because you just tell them to fuck off.
Yes. I think that was probably a lot of it. And I would have at the time, right? You know me, and I would have, I needed to come to that conclusion on my own. But I have a lot of great friends, whether it be from high school, from college. I don't just have fake superficial friends to call friends. Like if I call you a friend, you're genuinely my friend. I'd do anything for you. And so that was kind of cool to see how many of them kind of rallied around me. Like I'd be out with them, and so be like, hey, you need a drink or a beer? And they'd be like, no, he's good. Right. And I'd be like, yo, I got this. Like, I'm good. I appreciate you having my back, but I'm good. So yeah, it's different. And then it gets to be a point where like literally it's just breaking the habit. Right. So you get so used to sitting down and ordering a beer with dinner or an IPA or whatever. It's hard to just break that habit. Right. So But over time, after, a year or so, it just becomes life. And yeah, I'm definitely not a recluse now, right? I mean, you've been to my house. I've got a monster bar in the basement with a kegger. I mean, and I'm not the type that I don't want my lifestyle, my decisions to affect anyone else, right? My issue is my issue. It's not anybody else's issue. So I don't ever want somebody to pussyfoot around it and be like, oh, well, is it all right if I have a drink around you? Yeah, do whatever the hell you want. I don't give a shit, right? Like, do you. And so that's kind of my approach to it. It's not for everybody, right? I mean, I understand that I am unique in the fact that I never was an AA guy. I actually went through some Al-Anon, and I've gone to some AA classes with, or some AA sessions with some individuals who've reached out to me about getting sober. Because I do, it's worked for a number of individuals that I know. It's just not my thing. I'm the type that if I'm the 75 hard thing, right? I open my mouth, if I say I'm going to do something, I do it, right? And my philosophy and my take on the world is, if I can't be accountable to myself, how the hell can I ever be accountable to a client, to a friend, to a family member, right? If I can't keep my own word to myself. So if you say you're going to do something, just do it, right? But I understand, I've had a buddy that I love dearly came to wedding reception, and he was like, as soon as the dinner got done, he was like, came up, gave me a hug. He's like, yep, got to go. I get it, right? I understand. Don't want to put yourself in that situation. I respect the hell out of it. So everybody does the sober thing on their own path, their own way. Yeah, that's kind of my 2 cents on it, but I don't have any issues being around it. It's like I said, I'm a social person. I just love people. So people is my passion, helping people. So if it's going to happy hour and doing a happy hour meeting, as you know, I don't really give two shits. So somebody wants to bust my balls about having a Coke rather than a cocktail, it's like, don't need you, right? I got my own scorecard and I keep it with myself and nobody else. So don't really care.
I love that. Our paths began to cross, I think, at what you had done towards the tail end of college, unless you had something before this. So maybe talk about how you got into the professional space towards the tail end of college.
Yeah. So you're right. So my college career, again, had some bumps and bruises along the way, but after 7 years, I did graduate from the University of Nebraska, Lincoln. And I beat my sister by a semester, who was 3 years younger than me. So yeah, there's a little pressure there. But yeah, college was great. I had a lot of fun, but I had to learn, right? I had to grow up, and I did. So let's see, it would have been my last year of college. I had one of my best friends in the world, John Malloy, started working at Northwestern Mutual as an intern, right? And at the time, you'll find this weird, but I was running a bar, right? And
were you sober at that point?
Sober. I got sober when I was working at the bar. Yes. Yeah.
Well, listen, you were made for 75 hard, because the whole idea is to put yourself in difficult situations, and there.
But again, I alcohol around, like, as long as I have people around me, right? This, I can be obviously sober as a judge at the party, but a lot of times people think I'm the one who's most fucked up out of everybody, right? Because
you are between the ears, just not.
This is true. Yeah, this is true. So yeah, I mean, I never had any issues being around it. It was just, as long as I had people there, and I could engage and talk with anybody. So he calls me up and he's like, hey, I'm assuming eventually you're going to graduate. It's been 7 years. Like, you maybe want to get something other than a bar on your resume. Actually, he called me originally to try and get me to, typical Northwestern Mutual, buy some life insurance at, and I'm like, dude, I'm a mess. Like, no, I don't need life insurance or disability insurance. Like, I'm a bartender and going to school. And he's like, well, then maybe you should look at this internship thing. And I was like, well, I am going to be graduating at the end of the semester. Maybe not a bad idea. So I go in, I interview, I get the gig, right? And I get licensed in, I think October, November. I know I had 6 months to compete at the intern level. And I think they ran that through May, because it was like college, whatever.
Yeah.
And so I remember asking my manager, my college unit director at the time, like, he's like, well, what do you want to do with this thing? And I was like, I don't know, just be a badass. And he's like, all right, well, you got 6 months if you want to try and finish top 10 in the country. And I was like, all right, let's do that. So
for context for people listening, typically there's 2,500 to 3,500 interns throughout the country that all start, in a given year. So just so there's some context.
yeah, so they had, you basically have a May to May to compete on that thing. And I had, whatever, I think it was November, December to May to try and catch up and compete in that. And ultimately I hit my goal. I was number 6 in the country, which was awesome. And I fell in love. Like I said, that was my new passion. Fast forward, graduate, go full time. So then they have I think it's the Mike Gish competition for the first full-time full year, calendar year competition. And, my new goal became then to be number 1 because I had a full year now. And ultimately I did that as well, which I think you were with me on both of those journeys on stage, were you not? You were also top 10.
I wasn't on stage with you. So now, so I was always a year or a class, whatever you want to call it, like behind you. So like, I didn't get to see you when you were an intern, but when I was an intern, I finished.
That's what it was. When I was a Gish, you were on stage for intern.
Correct. So I was in the top 20. I think I was literally like 20th as an intern. And then I saw you up there. We hadn't known each other. I just knew you. And it's funny because at the time I'm like, this does not look like a former college student like 1 year ago. And now you taking 7 years fucking makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, what they call the non-traditional.
Yeah, that is a grown ass man up there. But I remember I wanted to be following your footsteps and be number 1 Mike Gish. I ended up finishing number 5 the year after, but that was the first time that you were my radar.
Gotcha. Yeah, that I knew you'd said something about that because the first time I met you, it kind of surprised me because you're like, yeah, I know who you are. And then you were like, you were that asshole who was on stage. You were number 1 and I was that's what you said. You were I was number 5.
Yeah.
Kind of busted my chops about that. And then, we connected there. And then obviously the world has a funny way of working out. We ended up both leaving the same year. I stayed in the industry. You obviously started coaching and consulting advisors, and circle back. First year I was on the RIA side of things, on the independent RIA side of things. One of our good buddies, Pete Neal, who's a stud, shout out Pete Neal.
Or as you call him, come on.
Pistol Pete.
Pistol Pete.
You guys randomly went to high school together, and he's a wholesaler. Yeah, played baseball together. He's a wholesaler for Hancock, based out of Massachusetts, spends half his time in Omaha. He brings you in for your first speaking engagement. And that's when I was like, yo, I know you from Northwestern days. You're like, yeah. And ultimately we kicked it off from there and still didn't have a working relationship. I introduced you, I think, to Dan, get to do some stuff there. I busted you guys' chops for having somebody on your pod because I introduced you two that was in the same industry as me. And then we've just stayed in touch, right? Like, it's been crazy how the universe works out.
What was it like? And I agree. It's kind of looking back and seeing the chain of events that had to happen to ultimately lead to even recording this podcast that we're literally in the midst of recording right now is fucking wild.
Yep.
It's insane the things that need to line up for that. But I want to go back to, you kind of breezed over this and I want to unpack it. So you mentioned, hey, I had 6 months and I finished 6th in the country out of whatever it was that year, 25 to 3,500 interns. And then I finished number 1 in the country, which is probably around 1,000 people, at that mark, maybe like 800 to 1,200 to speak a little bit more broadly. like unpack that a little bit. Like that's no joke. Like the work ethic involved, the amount of input that you had to do. Like I want to understand sort of the things that you focused on that led to that success. At the end of the day, as you know, this podcast is about leaving tidbits and crumbs for other folks to implement. So the hell were you implementing that we can unpack?
Yeah. So, if you really want to look at how it became a reality for me, is I just worked the math backwards. It was kind of like the EOS thing before I'd even gotten into traction or EOS, right? Like I had looked at the past 3 years Mike Gish Award winners and what they had to do for production. And then I added a little juice on top of that. And then I worked the math backwards and I figured out, how many new clients that I not needed to bring on, or how many meetings that I needed to keep that week. I just did the math on all of it. Right. And then I could focus and bring that down. Literally, I broke that down to a daily level on, how many dials I needed to make or how many people I needed to reach and set new appointments that day. I was just a freak about it. It was at that time, I didn't have anything else, right? It was myself and a roommate in an apartment in Lincoln, Nebraska. Shout out Matt Lieber. He and I were just doing our thing, and I'd work sun up to sundown. And it was a grind, but it was the only way to build a business, right? So I was broke, dude. Like, they were paying me $100 a week. Otherwise, it was like, go eat what you kill. So remember, I'd drive 4 hours one way for 2-3 meetings that day and drive 4 hours back. And 2 of the meetings no show me, right? Like that was just ate shit sandwich after shit sandwich, but you met a lot of cool people. The ones that did show up. A guy like Aaron Newell, right? Took a meeting with me in my first couple of years, we just had on. Like, the guy's a stud. Didn't ultimately become a client right away, but we just connected. And that's what I loved. I loved, where I could help people was great. But that's the way I did it, man. I worked the math backwards, and then I literally was so dialed in on what I had to do on a daily basis. If I could tell anybody out there, that's find a goal and then just back into the numbers, and it'll work. I don't know how you can't focus on the goal. You got to focus on the process, right? The process has to be first. If you work the process, the rest will take care of itself. The numbers ultimately will kick out where you want to kick out.
And I know that,
and then I became a dad. Then shit got thrown. Yeah. Then shit got thrown to the wind, and it was like, okay, survival mode all over again.
But I think it goes to show that, like, I mean, a couple of things that stand out with what you just shared. One is, like, don't try and guess at how to do this. What you did is you found someone that you wanted to be like, right? The last few winners of that particular award. And Northwestern is a fairly transparent system to know, kind of what they did numbers wise and what that means activity wise. But even if it's a different industry, just pick someone and ask them, hey, what did you do to get there? I want to beat you respectfully. But pick that target that you have. And then, to your point, break it down, not just, okay, here's what I need to do every month. That's not good enough. Here's what I need to do every week. That's not good enough. Nope. Here's what I need to do every day, every hour of every day. And you just focus on those daily disciplines. And then ultimately you pick your head up a year later and you're like, oh shit, that actually worked.
It is, dude. Like, I remember I had to set 3 new meetings a day on the phone, and I had to keep 2 meetings a day. That was it.
And then when you think about it that way,
sounds simple.
The job is easy.
Yeah.
And that
but
could
I'd
be
literally have to sit in my office for 10 hours if I needed to, until 3 new people told me, yes, I'll meet you with you. Yeah. And that was it.
That's it. And that can be applied to any industry. There's probably 1 to 3 things that if you did those 1 to 3 things every single day,
the rest is bullshit and noise. If you just did those first, and then once those were done, then you focused on the emails and everything else, life will be so much better.
Well, and just then figure out, like, sometimes people overcomplicate things where they're like, well, what about this? What about, whoa, you're not there yet. You'll learn how to hire a team. You'll learn how to market yourself. You'll learn how to brand yourself. You'll learn how to provide a great client experience. Like you'll learn all those things along the way, but none of that matters if you have no one to bring through that system. So let's just start bringing folks in the system.
You got to be in the game.
Break, fix it,
Yep. You got to be in the game first, right? Like in order to do anything. So that was always my thing was if I'm not profitable, I'm not going to be in the game. I can't help people. So be in the game and then figure it out as you go. Know yourself, right? I know what I am and what I'm not. And I'm not, that was the other thing. Like Northwestern kept wanting to fly me all over the country and to go talk to this, this organization, this network agency. I figured out real quick that like they wanted me to go that management route, right? And you know me, I don't give a shit about other people's bullshit. And I tried to appease them for a bit. Finally, I was like, look, I don't want to deal with these other idiots that are calling themselves trying to be advisors, because let's be honest, 95+% of them are going to fail. That's the statistic was, I think.
Well, that's what's interesting about you is when you know someone's committed in it to win it, you'll do anything for them, but it's the surface level bullshit that you do not entertain in the slightest. And that's what that is.
Yep. I don't have time for it. Right. Like I just don't. I remember I used to tell people like, don't be offended, but until you've been here at least a year, I don't even want to know your name because I won't see you in a year. And that's okay. Right. Go do whatever, call your aunts and uncles and try and sell a bunch of insurance for now, but you won't be here in a year. And they'd look at me like, holy shit, this guy's a dick. Right. But it was the truth. Like, I just didn't care. Like 97% of people were going to fail before 5 years. That was just the average. And we all knew it. I mean, they didn't hide that, right? You knew it. I knew it.
Yep. Just
part of the deal. So they throw enough shit at the wall and see which one of us sticks, and then away they go. Right. So, yeah, it was, and I don't ever want to take anything away from that. It was a great place to learn. Right. And it taught you how to grind and to build a business for sure. Just philosophically though, once you're in the business long enough and you give a shit about your clients, you start to kind of see, maybe there's other things out there that are better platform wise for my clients. And I know you're like me. It's like, if I know there's a better mousetrap and all of a sudden you're saying I can't offer that to clients, like, then I can't be here. I need to be where I can offer whatever's best for clients. And that's ultimately where I wanted to be. And so here we are in the RIA world, and I love it. Right. It's great. And it's afforded me the ability to kind of get into some of this real estate stuff I'm doing now. I mean, a bunch of different stuff. Right. And it's awesome. So, don't ever put yourself in a box, be multifaceted, have the flexibility to do what you want and do what's best for you and your family.
Talk about the difference between, just for those who may not know, when they're working with an advisor, generally speaking, what's the difference between sort of the broker dealer world and the RIA space, from your perspective, and what ultimately of those differences, why is it that the RIA space is the space that you wanted to end up at?
Yeah. So, I don't want to say this without saying the broker dealer world, you can do good over there. It's just sometimes hard when you have a company or an organization that has metrics that you need to hit. And those are sales metrics based on their products that they're selling. That to me is the wrong way to go about financial planning. Right. So my view of it was, I was required in order to keep my contract active to go out and sell X number of life insurance or disability insurance or long-term care insurance contracts every year. And so, Northwest's a great insurance organization. I won't take that away from them. They are. But when when you've got a hammer in your tool belt, then every problem has to become a nail. Right. Mm-hmm. And so it drove me nuts. Right. I mean, the shit that they were trying to say that whole life insurance should be used for. And I'm like, I don't agree with that. Like, I can see what the equities market does. I can see that it takes 10 to 15 years to get even just my money back in a whole life contract. Well, I could have more than doubled that in the equities market. I'm not buying what you're selling here, right?
But it's a Swiss Army knife, Landon.
Yeah, it's a Roth IRA with a free physical, right? Yeah, right.
Yeah. The rich people's Roth IRA. But it does have a place in the plan for particular circumstances. It's just not everything is a nail like it was positioned there.
Yeah. And let's be honest, it's a very rare occurrence where that is the best option as well. So, I was trying to do the right thing and do the investment piece primarily because, again, that's where I believe most of the clients' wealth should have been being accumulated, not insurance contracts. And it was like, well, we're not going to pay you out shit on your asset management side of things unless you do a boatload of insurance sales, and then you're magically get paid out more. And I'm like,
this doesn't make sense.
Yeah, this is bullshit, right? So eventually, figured out the independent RIA space where you legally have to act as a fiduciary and in the client's best interest was probably the best place for me. And I kind of got into it with my managing partner at Northwestern. I remember he told me at one time I signed a contract to work for him, and I said, I respectfully, I think that's bullshit. I've signed a contract and always took the assumption that I worked for my clients. And he quickly reminded me that that wasn't the case. And I knew from there that we were going to have some issues, and we did because I don't bite my tongue and back down from anything. And so, we parted ways, and it's been great. Appreciate my time there, but I love my time here. And I love what I'm doing now, right? I mean, I've kind of got multifaceted business stuff going on with you, some real estate stuff here. I mean, I'm able to kind of go and do what I want freely, and I work with the people that I want to work with, and we're in a position that, I'm not having to go out and bring on any new clients a year if I don't want to, right? And so it's a nice position to be in. And that's kind of where we're at now.
And how'd you link up with the RIA that you're with now with Wealth Plan?
Yeah. So, Omaha it's a million plus population wise, but it's a big, small town. And obviously, as you know, when you're in the financial services industry for as long as I have been, what companies are doing what. And they were always very well respected. And quite frankly, when I came across clients that, they were clients of the firm I'm at now with Wealth Plan, they'd always done a really good job of financial planning, and I respected that. And then I got to know one of my partners now from one of the golf clubs I was at. And then I managed to meet Wade and Todd. And like I said, I always knew Brent was a firecracker. Wade and Todd, once I met them, they were great, salt of the earth guys as well. They were actually the only firm that didn't offer me money to come over. Because when you kind of got a book built, you're kind of interviewing the firm more than they're interviewing you, right? Mm-hmm. They want you to move your assets over there. And they were like, yeah, we're not going to give you shit, but we like you. If you want to come over here, we think you could build something with us. And I respected that. Right. And so, I didn't want to go somewhere for a check. I wanted to go for the right reasons and build something and be in a culture and group of guys and that I believed in and appreciated and would hang out with outside of work. And it's been a fun ride.
One of the things that I've admired about you is the relationships that you do have and hold with people. Like you're the type of person that has a guy or a gal for
Bobby Beans,
anything.
2 guns. I know a guy.
Exactly. So it's, and I don't know if it's a combination of obviously a you thing or just the vibe of the Midwest that I'm coming to realize, but I feel like your circle is so big yet so tight, if that makes sense. I feel like the relationships that you have are reflective of like having 2 really close friends. Like that's how deep the relationships are, but that those 2 really close friends are multiplied by like, I feel like 20, like there's 40 people that you have that level of depth with. And I'm just curious to like unpack that a little bit. Like, what do you think that's a result of? Are you intentional about it? Like, help me understand, because I feel like I do a good job at that. And then I, hang out with you and see the folks and the relationships that you have. I'm like, shit, like people love Landon.
And I don't even see it, right? Like, it's crazy until you say it like that. And it's like, yeah, I mean, I guess that you're not wrong, right? I don't know, man. I think it's just like I said, I think a lot of it is my dad and kind of how he saw things. I mean, I don't know, fact or fiction, but what I can tell you is that I think my father's funeral is potentially one of the largest funerals ever held in North Platte, Nebraska. I mean, you literally had a guy who gave the eulogy at my dad's funeral, who was his first he was on the SBA, Small Business Association side of things. My dad got to know him through that. His name was Glenn Davis. Great, wonderful old man. He was a speechwriter for presidents, for I believe 2 presidents of the United States. Did the eulogy at my dad's funeral. So you had this guy, right, completely over here. And I'll never forget when we left the church. Nobody could fit in the church, right? It was completely overflow out into the parking lot. People literally just stood there, paid their respects while the ceremony's going on inside, funeral's going on inside. And when we were driving through leaving, you got Glenn Davis, who's a speechwriter for presidents, and then there was a bunch of biker dudes literally in their vests, right? Like in their patches. Like, my dad knew everybody and he didn't give a shit, because at the end of the day, we're all fucking human and deserve to be treated with respect until you disrespect me, right? Then we got issues. But you know what I mean? I don't care if you're the janitor. I don't care if you're worth $5 billion. You're going to get treated the same, right? Initially, until you prove that, because quite honestly, the janitor's probably going to be a more kick-ass dude than some $5 billion tech nerd. I'm probably going to relate to the janitor a lot more, right? And I don't care, right? I'm just not infatuated with like, woe is me, like I don't do ego stuff very well. In fact, I do quite the opposite. I like real people. I would say the people without flaws are the ones that scare the shit out of me, right? Because they're the ones that are the most flawed. So I don't know. I think it's just been through the course of this business and being genuine and real. I just get to know people on a pretty deep level pretty quick. And I either really, as you know, I'm kind of an acquired taste, right? People generally go one of 2 ways with me. They either really like me or they're like, yeah, I got no time for that guy. He's an asshole, right? So, and that's okay with me. I'm fine with that. But my people are my people and I love hard. And if I can introduce them and make their life better, or they're in a place of need and I know somebody that can make their life better, yeah, I'm got no issues making those introductions. I've always just been a connector, and I just think it's like this podcast, right? When badass people come together, great things happen, and we're seeing that. I was kind of blown away by the number of people that were like, "Yo, you guys need to tell your story," and it got to the point where like we had quite a few people say that, and we were like, oh, maybe we need to. So, I don't. Again, I think when you're genuinely selfless and genuinely curious about others and wanting to help others, things just show up in your circle. Yours is the same way. Honestly, it's, you've moved. I'm sure if you were back in Mass, your circles be the same. I mean, I've always been a Nebraska boy, so I've gotten to know a number of people. You're in college for 7 years. You're a bartender. You do all these, you just get to know people. So it happens.
Love it. Well, Landon, I appreciate you spending some time talking about yourself. I know, coming into this, we were both like, it's kind of weird using this as an opportunity to talk about ourselves. So just know this is a result of you guys listening and people requesting this.
Yeah. Thanks for being interested.
Yeah, appreciate it. We're not just talking heads. You guys want to know a little bit. So
I have a beautiful daughter. Yeah, we like doing the small town living thing. I'm pretty simple.
Badass house, badass boat that I learned to surf behind. You live a cool life, and I'm very glad that not only did our paths cross, but it became more intertwined here recently. I remember, what was it, last late summer when we kind of started talking through this, and it's cool that it didn't just stop at an idea, but we actually executed upon it and have been doing this for, almost, flirting with half a year. So I've appreciated our friendship and how that's flourished. I appreciate our directness, and it's always cool that unless we're literally in a meeting and cannot answer our phone, it's usually one or two rings and the other person answers. So there were some things that I learned about you today that I didn't know. I appreciate you sharing all that stuff. And for everyone listening, we appreciate your time and, frankly, suggestion as well. But Landon, usually I say until next time, but until maybe 5 minutes from now, because we'll text or call or do something. So
as always, brother. No, and same goes on myself and Taylor's end. It's been more rewarding for us than anything. I mean, just again, because, now we've got friendships with you and Kennedy that are irreplaceable. I mean, it's been awesome getting to know you guys and, watching you through your first home purchase and then eventually, growing your family. That's the shit that life is about, right? Money's money. Relationships and people are what matter, and you can't take any of the other shit with you when you leave. So, why not be genuine and make it real while you're here and go from there?
Couldn't agree more. Every now and again, we need reminders of that, but couldn't agree more. But with that said, for everyone who listened today, appreciate your time, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Landon, nice learning about you a little bit more. Peace.
Thanks, brother. Later.
Who knew I would make it this far? They hated, they never believed me. Yeah, I would never drop the ball. I know I make it look easy. Yeah, Mayweather with the defense. I don't care what a critic got to say. I got them picking up the pieces.